Good morning and welcome to OSW Daily, where each morning we live stream. We discuss the current topics that are related to work, and we bring on industry experts and thought leaders to discuss those things with us. So thank you for joining us this morning. So what are we going to be talking about today? Today we're going to be talking about key issues, key conversations, questions that people are asking today. What does employee trust look like? Is being an entrepreneur harder than ever? Is remote working overhyped? How can we make more work more sustainable in the current environment, and what will inclusive office look like? This is where we're going to go with the general trend of the conversation, and we may go somewhere else, but in essence it just depends on where the conversation goes. So who are we chatting with today? I'm very happy to welcome back Ken van Someren. Ken is the owner of Boost Cognition, the brain power people enhancing performance in the workplace. Ken is a former elite athlete. I still think he's an elite athlete still, but he doesn't quite think so. But we talk a little bit about that. Ken has launched and led the GSK Human Performance Lab. He was a key player in developing the high performance system and led support for the Great Britain Olympic and Paralympic sports for the London 2012 Games. And he's a key opinion leader with an international profile in human health and performance. So let's bring Ken on and let's get the show started. Ken, good morning, good afternoon. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, hi there, Steve. Thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah, I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you?
Glad. I'm doing great. I do always like to introduce you as an elite athlete still, given your exploits. And I know some people, you may get a little, I don't know, maybe you don't think that way, but I certainly do. But I hope you're doing well. I hope the family's well. And it's an interesting day today, being that the U.S. elections are ongoing, and it was I don't know what it's like in the U.K., but here it's just crazy, man, at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think our news feed is probably as full as yours, perhaps slightly fewer channels reporting it, but it appears to be incredibly close. But hey, let's try not to talk politics today.
I'm with you 100%. And, as we were joking beforehand, I'm not American and I can't vote, so I can't be held responsible. So that's where I'm going to start with this,
Yes,
But
sir.
yeah, so I just really want to have an open conversation with you today, because we typically like to look at, okay, what is the current articles that are out there? What are people talking about? What are people looking at? And with the elections, I actually find a very, very limited information out there. So I just thought, let's go through a series of questions that I think are on people's lips today, what people are thinking about when we think about the workplace, we think about work, we think about the future of work. And I'm going to start with one, and is remote working, do you think it's overhyped?
Yeah, good question. So I, I think we're still on a journey with remote working, or at least many of us are. Of course, some companies, some individuals have been doing it for a long time. But certainly the clients we're working with at Boost, we see a relatively polarized response to remote working. And my perspective, I'm an ex-athlete. I've worked most of my career in high performance sports. And really my angle on workplace is all about how can we help individuals and teams and organizations achieve high performance. And of course, there's a whole host of aspects that underpin that. Um, there's individual employee health and well-being, and that's mental, physical, and emotional. It's organizational culture, social cohesion and teamship within the organization, but it's also the place and the physical environment as well. And all of these have a quite profound factor. Um, and what we see is, well, let's go back a few months. What we found was a lot of people quite enjoyed the novelty of the remote working. So we cut out the commute. In effect, we found ourselves maybe a couple of hours a day on average. Plus, we're eating at home. We might make better dietary choices. We might have time for more physical activity, and so on and so on. But then, of course, as time's gone on, uncertainty, if anything, has probably increased rather than decreased. And that's manifested as mental and psychological stress for a lot of people. And if we layer that on top of the always on phenomenon of digital communications that is inherent or appears to be inherent to working remotely, very often what we're seeing is for some people, they're working longer hours. There's a greater level of what we call digital fatigue because we're always on, whether it's video conferencing, which we know is more tiring, and more stressful than face-to-face meetings. Always on in terms of email communications or chat functions or whatever system the organization might have. And of course, without the benefits of the social cohesion. So I think it was being polarized from the start. Some people loved it. They had a great physical environment to work in at home. They had the conditions that suited them, and they could get this work-life balance or circle nicely in tune with what was best for them. We've had other people who have been working at the kitchen counter or in a bedroom, and that's hard. Ergonomically, it's poor. It's bad for physical well-being. We're seeing more neck ache, backache, shoulder ache, which isn't just uncomfortable. We know it has a significant detrimental effect on cognitive function as well. So our ability to do our work. And I think as a lot of the world is almost coming into a second lockdown, or certainly a heightened restriction due to COVID, I think we're seeing this reiterating itself, but without the novelty factor. So I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh God, here we go again. And the bad things are bubbling up to the surface almost immediately. So, in terms of, is remote working overhyped? Well, I think there's two ways to look at that. I know we've discussed this in the past. And I think the wrong way to look at it is, how do we replicate what we were doing, but in a remote fashion? And I think that's where we get ourselves into trouble, because it's almost impossible to do. I think where it's not overhyped is when we look at, here is a chance. We have a burning platform here to reconsider, how do we work? But I think to do that, we've got to be very clear on how we define work and how we define performance at work. And it's not about hours, and it's not, in most instances, certainly for knowledge workers, it's not about command and control management and leadership. So it's taking it right back to first principles and actually saying, well, what is required of the work and what does good performance look like? And I think with this burning platform and with technology innovations that we have, there is a real opportunity to redefine and rethink what work looks like. And I think if we can do that, then remote working certainly isn't overhyped.
There's so many things that to unpack, Ken. It's a few things I just I'm just like, my brain's like constant, just like going in circles. Like I have so many thoughts. I loved how you did note though that to continue doing work as if we're all in the office in this environment, we will not be successful. That's so important that we look about it, and it be it collaboration. We want to do collaboration in a synchronized way, because that's how we do it in the office, where obviously we have to sort of think about, okay, maybe it's an asynchronized way, and other things need to be sort of thought through that way. The other thing I sort of want to pull out as well is the unintended consequences of the remote work environment, right? So what are those unintended consequences? And you just noted them, right? So it's the family interaction, people having to work at home, other family members need to move around, change family meal time, be quiet at certain times, and all those little things I think are really important. And then the other thing you mentioned is boundaries, right? The boundaries of what is the personal life and what is the work life, and how do we bring those two things together? So whether or not they're overhyped, there are those that actually will feel that a lot of those answers are the remote working actually provides them answers to a lot of those questions that they have, where for other people they actually create problems, and it's going to be a really hard thing to balance.
And I think we've all seen some really good commentaries recently, which goes along the lines of, don't fall into the trap of looking at the average, because by and large, if we look at the average of our employees in our organizations, then it looks like we're all actually doing fairly well. And on average, we're the same, if not slightly better in terms of productivity. But as with any average, an average is great because it pulls together diverse data and diverse phenomena. But where it's poor is if we then make inferences from the average. And to say that, okay, holistically or at a macro level, we are as good, if not slightly better than we were before, is missing possibly half, if not more than half the workforce. And, reflecting on a couple of specific clients that we have, what's coming through loud and clear is when working remotely, the simple tasks are now becoming really onerous. So the things that you could have just tapped someone on the shoulder or had a quick chat, it could have been, you call over the desk, or you think I'll catch them at lunchtime, they're gone. So now trying to do some of these simple tasks that require a bit of input from other people or a bit of sense checking become slow. But they don't just become slow, they become incredibly frustrating. And we as workers, like any sports person or athlete, we have a finite capacity for stress and strain. And as we've said before, the physiological system, the body and brain, can't differentiate between here's some work stress, which is a simple task, here's some high level strategy work that's also a strain, and here's my personal life, and here's my compromised physical well-being because of neck and shoulder strain. It all manifests as biological stress on the system. So I think there's some really, really clear warning signs in here that if we don't take notice of, then if we continue remote working or sort of a blended approach to work and workplace, then we are certainly going to fall foul of. I think the other, and it's aligned to this, the really important thing here is, are we running the risk of reducing diversity in our work? And we often talk about creativity. Creativity we know needs fertile minds, working on something together, sharing perspectives. And I think intuitively, most people would say, yeah, I get that. But I think there's a tendency for us to think that slightly more mechanistic tasks or strategy development or implementation and decision making, okay, maybe there's less creativity to that. So we can sort of hunker down and do that. But what we know is we run the risk of working in an echo chamber. So it might be that, you, me, and a couple of others connect because we're like-minded. And we just hear our reaffirmation this chamber and we're convinced we're right. And I think there is a danger here when we go remote, partly because we can engage with fewer people. When we try to engage with lots of people through a VC type environment, we know lots of people disengage. And again, I think a real threat here is that we lose diversity, and particularly cognitive diversity. So there's various aspects of diversity, and it's people's creeds, it's races, it's everything else. But I think really importantly in the workplace as well is this cognitive diversity. And if we're not working double hard to ensure we've got that, then I think our decision making is going to be compromised.
Do you think there's more people switching off, or more people just turning up in a remote environment than they would in the in-office environment?
I think there probably is, but I'm not sure the fault necessarily lies with the workers. I think some of the fault lies with the managers and the leaders who perhaps mandate or certainly set the expectation that this is how we do it. But I guess this concept of digital presenteeism, I think is a massive problem. We spoke earlier about video conferencing is more tiring, and we see elevated cortisol levels compared to face-to-face meetings. So because of that, people are going to be less engaged and will have a finite capacity. So for some meetings, which they may well in their mind slightly deprioritize, there will be a lower level of engagement. So yes, we do get the presenteeism. And I think, with the presenteeism, the danger here is we still have some of the stress and the strain on the individual employee. So it's still taking its toll. But if they're not engaged, to my previous point, we're not getting the diversity, and we're not getting the cohesion of multiple brains and multiple perspectives in our thinking. So we're burning down the ammunition in one hand, but not realizing the benefits of it on the other.
Do you think the elevation in cortisol could be that people are getting stimulated to be part of a process, which is that conference? Is that a possibility, or do you think it's just stress of the situation?
I think there's probably, on the one hand, there's the stress of the situation, and it's harder work. Poor quality video, broadband connections, whatever else it might be, can just become slightly either stressful for the person experiencing it, but slightly off-putting for everyone else as well. And what we lack in that setting is, of course, all the positives we get of social human engagement. So we can't read the room, we can't read individuals in the same way, particularly if we've got more than about 4 people in our meeting, we can't read their body language. We can only see the people who are speaking or the people on the screen. So, from a biological or a physiological perspective, we don't have any of these positive feedbacks, which manifest in, as I say, the body language, how we think, but also in some biochemical responses as well, which in normal situations may well counter that stress response.
Yeah, and I was actually going to go and ask you, like, how will workers interact in this environment? But you kind of just explained all that, so I appreciate that. But whenever you think about, we think about the office, we think about the heartbeat, and you sort of think this is a remote environment. What do you think will be that future heartbeat of the office? Given that there will be those that go into the office each day, there will be those that go in sporadically or for different reasons. What do you think is going to be the heartbeat of the office in the future?
Well, I do think places are incredibly important. And, in my other life of high performance sport, we are very aware that athletes can train all around the world. Sports and governing bodies and national associations can be dispersed. And to some extent, that's fine. It's fine so long as everyone has an incredibly clear goal and they have the support they need. But what we lack is that focal point. And in sport, it's partly about bringing in the very best people. So the athletes and the players, the coaches, the backroom staff, the leaders, the thinkers, and giving a place for this to bubble and this to lead to innovation and this to lead to best practice. There's also an element in sport which I think is paralleled in business as well, which is you need a shop window. So whether you're bringing clients there or showing stakeholders, you need to be able to show this is where the magic happens. And we talk in the UK a lot about, the medal factory. So we have a huge focus on Olympic and Paralympic sport in the UK. And we've done it incredibly well for a nation of our size over the last few Olympiads. And, what we need to do is take politicians in and take stakeholders and industry partners and say, this is the medal factory. This is where the magic happens. And that is incredibly compelling because we are social creatures. We like seeing people and we like seeing things. And I think for a lot of people, yes, we can connect and we can discuss online, but I still think we lack that focal point, the focal point of a place. And I think we've discussed it previously, Steve, but I know there's a number of organizations who are, they're reinventing the office, and it's not a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 6 Monday to Friday. It's a hub that we come into at certain times. Working with a creative agency a few months back, one of the things that was novel to me was actually, they never call the office an office. They call it a studio. And when I first heard that, I actually thought that was a little bit, I don't know, almost a bit of self-indulgence and self-importance there. But actually, I thought about it and I thought, so many people have this concept of an office is you come in, you sit down, you do your work. Whereas a studio is far more about you bring people together, you are creative. And my own belief, and we have some data to demonstrate this, but certainly my belief is that really we need to think about not only what does excellence and high performance in work look like, but why are we bringing people into the office, the hub, or the studio? How is that going to enhance it? So going back to that performance model I mentioned at the moment around high performance in the workplace, we've got the place, we've got individual well-being, we've got organizational culture and social cohesion. We've got to look at all these determinants of performance and see what's going to make a difference. So I think that's where we still need to work on the heartbeat. Now, traditionally, or for a number of years, we know some organizations have worked very effectively remotely. But by and large, they tend to be small teams doing fairly specific functions. And when we focus on the knowledge workers, different across different industries, of course, but by and large, there's great merit for all the reasons that we've discussed around diversity and inclusion, of course, as well. But giving people a sense of purpose and motivation, and I guess a line of sight of what the organization is about and what it's trying to achieve. I don't think, or I haven't seen any instances of where that's being done particularly well on a pure remote working basis.
Yeah, and some of the conversations I've been having recently kind of suggest exactly and agree with what you're saying. I think what's sort of coming clear to me is individuals. If we think about team dynamics, the immediate team that you work with, folks are typically saying, I've never been so close or as close to my immediate team as I've ever been, because we're typically on video every day. We're conversing with each other. We're keeping each other informed. But those other groups, cross teams or other teams that you don't naturally connect with, but maybe you sat beside in the office, rarely now do you have conversations with those individuals. Rarely do you hear that heartbeat that you were discussing, right? So you may be sitting beside a team that is completely different to you, but actually you get to hear what else is going on in the organization. And that just then, to your point, right, that's really the heartbeat of what the organization is. It has to be what other teams bring to the table and bring to you as an individual and a team.
Yeah, I completely agree. And how often do we see different functions within an organization working in a relative silo? And we all know that's bad. We all know it doesn't work, but it happens. And very often that comes down to reporting lines, and maybe it's about individual work tasks and objectives rather than projects and outcomes. But I think that is a real problem. It is a real problem. And I came across something really good last week, which was all about how to be visible in a remote working environment. And they made a couple of really good points. And one I remember very clearly is all about, think about where your super strengths lie and make those visible. So don't necessarily busy yourself with more admin and copying people into emails that don't need to be copied in. That's not visibility. That's just being a nuisance. But think about, what are the things that I'm really good at in my role that I can share, and I have the opportunity to maybe change some thinking, take on a bit of a leadership role, certainly in terms of the way we approach this, and be visible in doing that. And the other very good one was invest in the follow-up. So many of us are good at getting to 85% completion and then thinking, we've done our bit, fine, move on to the next. And many of us, we enjoy the new challenge and the next project and the feeling if we've got it done, we're progressing. But the point that was made in this, it was a podcast, was actually the job's not done until the communication has been completed, if it's ever completed, and you've taken everyone with you on that. And I think that the analogy they made, or the statistic they sort of threw out there was, that final 10 or 15% of effort can double the impact of the work that you've had. So I think there's a couple of things that we can really work on in terms of being visible and making an impact in that remote environment.
Yeah, I think the follow-up is a great thing. And I think I actually never fully appreciated the follow-up until I moved to the US, because the UK, we're very much, okay, we did it. We don't want to overburden people with the follow-up and so on and so forth. Where I found in the US, it was very much, the follow-up is really important, especially from sales, from marketing perspective. And it really was hammered home. So it's a really, really good thing. So we're obviously, people are working today. We have values in our jobs. Okay. We think a lot of job roles, especially in the workplace and how people are going to work in the future, are going to change. So how do we as individuals value our jobs today, and how do you think that value will change over time? It's an easy one, right?
Yeah, I know. We're getting to the end, so you throw me a hard one there. Thank you.
There you go. There you go.
So I think value it in someone's role, this is absolutely critical. And a lot of people sort of say to me, working in sports is easy because everyone's incredibly motivated. There is a very clear goal, and they passionately care about achieving that goal. And to some extent, that's right. But there's plenty of people, in the backroom staff or behind the scenes for whom, know they might never touch the trophy, or they might be several steps removed away from it. But I do see, particularly in very large organizations, that can be difficult. We've all heard the janitor at NASA story and analogy, and that can come across as being a little trite at times. But one of the things we get people to look at is where they feel a dissatisfaction or a lack of engagement or feeling a lack of purpose and worth with their role. It's almost, well, redefine it. So yes, take your job description. They're the things you have to do, but then actually take it further. If you do these things, what does it mean? What impact does it have? And I guess that's where our, often quoted janitor at NASA comes in so beautifully, because it really, if you lead it through, whether you're working in a design team for an agency or, your admin staff in a sales company, this all ladders up to what the company and the organization are trying to achieve. But the best leaders in the world will always try and give people this line of sight. But that's an incredibly difficult thing to do when we're dealing with possibly, tens of thousands of different perspectives, different value sets, different personal drivers. So I think it's really important for the individual to say, well, what does this mean to me? And, you can go back several steps and go, well, is this the right role for you? Is this the right sector for you? Does it map onto your interests, your passions, your sense of worth? And that's a worthwhile exercise for anyone. But I appreciate a lot of people are in a job and almost don't want to go quite that far. But I think going through that point of that, here I am, this is really hard. What's it all for? It's a really beneficial and a really empowering way to approach it, to say, well, this is what I do and this is what it means. And so, you might not get a huge amount of joy and self-satisfaction and reward out of auditing spreadsheets. But why are you doing that? What does it mean around product safety or compliance or whatever else it might be for your customers and your consumers? And then I think we can achieve that. But I think your question there specifically around what does remote working do to that? And I think, if anything, it just puts it into even sharper perspective.
Yeah, and I think the way you answered it, I think about that, and I think about the follow up. It's taking personal responsibility, right? I think when in a remote environment, we all have to take responsibility for our own career, our own path, and whatever way direction we want to go. And I think that is the overarching thing that I'm getting from you, Ken.
Yeah, well, I think it is, and I'll finish with another analogy in sport. It sits with the athlete and the player. You can have the best coaches in the world, you can have the best medics and sports scientists and backroom staff, the best facilities, but unless the individual really wants it, it's never going to happen. So performance is a collective, but we all need to take personal responsibility and accountability for that. Completely agree.
No, that's great, Ken. That's great. Look, thank you. I appreciate your time once again. I always enjoy our conversations. It's always thoughtful, and it's always leaves me with more questions to follow up with you on. So hopefully I get the ask you some of these off camera. But folks, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing to the channel, and reach out to Ken. There are links below in the comment section where you can reach out to Ken. So Ken, thank you, man. Have a great day.
Pleasure.
Cheers, mate.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks
Bye.
a lot, Steve. Bye for now.